Academica Media. You are listening to Charter School Superstars, bringing you the voices of an education revolution.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Ryan Kairalla from Doral College. Joining us on the program this week, we have Christopher Hines, the Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel of Crescent City Schools in Louisiana, and Jessica Johnson, the General Counsel for Strive Preparatory Schools in Colorado. Recently, our guests delivered a presentation at the National Charter Schools Conference on the legal considerations that charter schools are confronting with the return to in-person schooling. You can find out more about our guests' work by visiting crescentcityschools.org and striveprep.org. We are happy to welcome Christopher Hines and Jessica Johnson onto Charter School Superstars. Hello, counselors. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having us.
So excited. There are way too many lawyers in this room right now. Just
Yes.
I mean, normally they'll say whenever this many lawyers get together, it's usually trouble. Nothing, people can get scared. But I assure our listeners and our viewers, there's a lot to like from the lawyers in this room. We got two really knowledgeable charter school attorneys here who advise two fantastic charter school organizations on a wide range of legal issues, including what's going on right now with the pandemic and the return to in-person schooling. And I know this is a topic that is on the top of mind of everybody listening and watching to this program. So we're excited to have you guys here to talk about it. But before we get into that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you because I love chatting with fellow attorneys in the charter education space. And the one question I love to ask them at the cocktail parties, but since we'll do a virtual cocktail party here, and I'll ask you both this question here. We'll start with you, Christopher. What got you interested in the legal side of charter education? I mean, an attorney like you could probably do a wide range of things, work in a wide range of industries. What made education your interest?
Well, I actually started working in education before I became a lawyer or was interested in the law. I was a public school teacher in Atlanta for 3 years right after college. And then I moved to New York, and I was not working in education for a while and realized I really missed it. So I started working in the finance and operations side of a charter school network in New York. And I really, really liked what I was doing there. And I got to work a lot with the outside counsel that organization had and really enjoyed that work. So that's when I decided I was going to go back to grad school, become a lawyer, but I still wanted to work in education. I knew that. And so I was looking for jobs that would allow me to do that when I was finishing up grad school. And I found this great position at Crescent City Schools, and I've been here 10 years now.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. And certainly my law school class had a great many teachers turned lawyers in it. And quite a few of them found their way back into the profession, found their way back to that first professional love. So it's great to hear that story. How about you, Jessica? Are you a teacher turned lawyer, or did you have a different path?
Unfortunately, I have not spent any time in the classroom other than substitute teaching. And so
nothing wrong with that, by the way.
That has been a challenge. But unlike Chris, I actually started more in the traditional corporate space and did not have any experience in public education other than my own education. And I got really fortunate when I decided that corporate law was not for me. I was really burned out, and I was looking for new opportunities. And the Colorado League of Charter Schools was looking for a policy/legal person. And I thought, hey, I've never heard of a charter school before, but I'm sure I could do this. And I got really lucky. I worked there for 10 years and fell in love with charter schools, public education, and really discovered my passion. And then I was able to transition and work for Strive, which has been really great because it allows me to not just work with a lot of schools like I did when I was at the league, but really go deep with one network and provide a lot of resources and guidance, and have the opportunity to be in the classroom a little bit more. So I've really enjoyed it.
That's fantastic. This is great. We sort of have the two different paths into the legal side of charter education represented here in this interview. So I dig that. It's great to put faces to the emails with both of you and have this really important conversation right now. We're going to talk a little bit about the legal considerations that charter schools are facing right now with the return to in-person learning amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Further, of course, complicated by the fact of the rise of the Delta variant and how it's creating a whole new host of considerations that probably sort of have emerged even after your National Charter Schools Conference presentation, which wasn't that long ago. So this should be a pretty interesting conversation. Before we get into it, though, I think on behalf of our two guests here, I should do the lawyerly disclaimer here that I think is important. Even though we have a bunch of lawyers here in this interview, it's important to mention that while the people talking are lawyers, they're not your lawyer, and every legal situation is unique. So what you're going to be hearing in this interview is not legal advice. It's informational, educational purposes only. You are encouraged to talk with your own counsel about your own unique legal situation to make sure you get the best advice for your particular situation. Chris, let me start with you on this. In the course of the presentation that you and Jessica delivered, what were some of the biggest 30,000-foot view legal considerations that charter schools were confronting, that your clients were perhaps confronting with the return to in-person learning?
Sure. So much has happened over the past year and a half, as we all know. And one of those things is there have been a lot of new laws passed at both the state and federal level that are responsive to the COVID crisis. And a lot of these laws either directly or indirectly impact schools. And so it's important that schools and their attorneys have kept on top of those developments, know what those new laws are and how they impact them. And I think the other place is around schools themselves having to create their own policies and their own protocols for dealing with the COVID crisis. And perhaps in an area where schools have not been creating policies and procedures in the past. And so schools need to be thinking about what legal implications or what legal guardrails there might be that they have to be mindful of as they're creating and implementing these policies for themselves.
No question. And a big part of setting policy at the legal level for your particular school clients, maybe the biggest part, certainly the part that's, I think, on the top of most people's minds, just given the recent news lately coming out of health agencies and things like that, is vaccination. And I imagine that, especially with the recent full approval of the Pfizer vaccine by the FDA, vaccination is a top concern for schools. So, Jessica, when you're talking to schools and when you're exploring this question, what are some of the things that you're thinking about and that schools should be thinking about with respect to vaccinating staff members, teachers, administrators, things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it has come up, obviously, for us and schools across the country. So there's a few things. The first I would say is understanding your local and state requirements. So some municipalities, like recently on August 2nd, the Denver mayor had a mandate that required all public schools teachers to be vaccinated or to have an accommodation. In California, the governor issued a similar order. In some states, that's not there. So what you need to really understand is what are my local and state laws about vaccinations, and so that you can understand before you put a policy or before you communicate to your staff, what are we legally allowed to do? What are we legally allowed to ask? And so you want to think about that. And then you also want to think about what's important to your community and looking at if you're going to ask people for vaccination status, if you're going to require vaccines, you want to think about from an HR perspective, how are we going to store and secure this information, because this is private medical information? And then also, how are we going to make sure that staff have an avenue to file accommodations? Because in every state that does require, or every municipality that requires or allows a vaccination, there has to be an avenue for a staff to file an accommodation. And so if you're the HR person, or if you have a smaller school and you don't have an HR professional, you need to make sure that you are finding someone who can help you understand how do we process accommodations.
And so, Jessica, a lot of the things that you're talking about in terms of making sure that you're on top of the different state, local, federal guidance that exists on this subject, a lot of that, what you said with respect to employees, is also going to apply, Jessica, to student vaccinations. Maybe not as much on the HR side, but you're going to have to need to keep an eye on the legal mandates and the legal guidance that exists, not just for your employees, but your students as well, especially as the vaccine approvals are starting to come into place for younger and younger students.
Yes, that's 100% correct. You don't want to make any decision about vaccines, whether or not you decide to require them or require proof of vaccines or incentive about vaccines for students or staff, without talking to your attorney. And if you feel like the attorney that you typically use for charter school things, like your contract renewal or your buses or whatever, is not someone who has an expertise in that, this is the time to look for someone new and someone who is has expertise in that, and to your point earlier, who also is following the news, because as we know, what's going on in Florida, things change every hour. So you really need someone who's up to speed on this. So the biggest guidance I could give on that is make sure you don't make any decisions without talking to an attorney first.
That makes a lot of sense. Sage advice indeed. Christopher, let me expound on that larger point that we were discussing in terms of following the guidance from different, structures of the government. I think the biggest headache that I often hear from administrators isn't just about following the guidance, but feeling like you have to follow the guidance of many different organizations, right? We have a federal system here, so our schools have to perhaps take their cues from many different governments. There's federal guidance coming from the CDC. There's civil rights guidance that may come into play when talking about HR implications for vaccine mandates. The state government may be communicating, especially in charter school jurisdictions where you're taking a lot of cues from the state government. And then, of course, local governments like your school board are perhaps going to be communicating information to you. And for a lot of administrators that I talk to, it can be maddening just to have to, you're taking cues from so many different people involved in the government, and it can be hard to know what you should be listened to weigh the balances. Do you have any insight on how you kind of walk your own administrators through this particular labyrinth and maybe keep them sane?
Yeah, that is such a good point. And, in a perfect world, the guidance you would be getting from everyone would be the same and would be aligned. Sadly, we know that's not always the case. And so it's been important, I think, two things. First, to know, what is just guidance or suggestions and what is actually a legal mandate that you are required to follow. And then secondly, it's important to know who actually has jurisdiction over you. Charter schools, as we all know, are kind of a special entity. And so certain rules and laws that apply to some schools in your state or your jurisdiction may not apply to you as a charter school. So it's important to know, or to talk with your legal counsel or someone who does know, exactly which laws, guidance, and regulations apply to you specifically as your charter school.
And I would add, if I could, real quick on that, is that if you are getting when you get legal advice for your attorney, I would really suggest you asking them to put it in writing and follow up with you, because as you guys both talked about, this is a really complex and changing situation, and there's a lot of different opinions and thoughts and matters. If for some reason the decision you make now is challenged at a different time, or there's a change in that, the guidance, you want to be able to say, this is the guidance I received from my attorney on this date, and this is why. You want to be able to share that with your community members. And also, if there's a challenge, you want to be able to share that to whoever may be challenging you.
Absolutely. That's a big part of it. And it's always good to have a document that you can kind of hold on to and look at and be ready to have revised as the information changes, as the government mandates change. That's absolutely right. Now, there's a lot more to that in terms of policy that can be done to limit the spread of COVID on individual school campuses. We talk about vaccines and we talk about masks, but there's a lot of other tools in an administrator's tool belt. Have you spoken to schools, and do you do any, professional development, things like that, in terms of advising schools on what other safety protocols schools might be considering and should be considering to limit the spread of COVID? We'll ask you that one to Jessica.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We are really putting out, we talked about it in our presentation, making sure you have a checklist to your building. We call them operations managers, but it may be facility staff or otherwise, that really goes through the cleaning procedures that you use and what you're doing each day. And so I recommending make sure you have a checklist of that and you have a responsible person at staff, so that this is what we do every day. This is what we sanitize. These are the available, different tools and resources we have, and that you have someone on campus who's responsible for that. Because I think, obviously, as we all know, one way to stop the spread is just making sure that you clean, disinfect, and sanitize, and that your students and staff are taking ownership of that. But ultimately, there's someone in the building who is the final owner of that you can follow up with if something's not happening the way it needs to happen.
Christopher, on the HR side, are there any other human resources considerations that we haven't talked about that are important for schools to consider when working through the additional challenges imposed upon schools by the pandemic?
Yes, a few things. Jessica touched a little already on your staff needing to be able to request accommodations if you have a vaccine or a mask mandate in place, if they have medical or religious reasons why they're not able to comply with that. COVID leave is a big thing. Towards the beginning of this, the federal government created a federal COVID leave that applied to many employees. Then it expired and there became an optional version, but that is set to expire at the end of September. So it's time for schools to be thinking about, what do you want to do in terms of the leave you offer to your staff if they have to be away from work for a COVID-related reason. And then there have also been some benefit law changes at both the federal and the state level that could impact what you are offering, what you may offer, or what you have to offer your staff. I know two areas that are impacted are in terms of COBRA, continuation of insurance when your employees stop working for you, and also flexible spending accounts. Rules around those have changed recently.
So I'm just making a list over here for myself to be able to communicate to the schools I work with. That's great insight. Before we get to our final question, let me ask you, Jessica, and I'm always told it's dangerous to ask lawyers open-ended questions, but I'm going to go ahead and throw this one out here anyway. What have we missed? Are there any other tips for administrators that you think are important to impart as they navigate COVID-related challenges on their campuses?
I think there's just so many different areas, but one I would definitely say is providing your staff with talking points and making sure that your staff understand. You don't want them to have to think on the moment if an angry parent or community member or someone else is approaching them because they don't like the school's decision. So making sure your staff have talking points, they understand why you have the cleaning protocols you do, the mask protocol you do, or maybe vaccinations or maybe not. And so that you have the talking points so your staff feel empowered and they don't feel attacked in the moment without being able to share anything. And then I think I can't underscore enough the need to make sure that your HR folks are really high level. They have the tools that they need. And if not, that you have a third party that you're reaching out to, because so many of these things touch the employer side. And it's really important to make sure you're getting really good guidance there.
What a joy for us to be joined by two fantastic general counsels from two incredible charter school networks. We have, again, Christopher Hines from Crescent City Schools and Jessica Johnson from Strive Preparatory Schools. Louisiana and Colorado got some great charter schools thanks to your efforts, guys. And I've really appreciated talking to you. Before we let you go, one last question. I'm going to pose this one to each of you because I'd love to get two answers to this very important question. We'll start with you, Christopher. If with the snap of your fingers, you could make any change to the education system, what change would it be?
That is a good question. I think I would create universal free preschool in the same way that we have that available for students in grades K through 12. I would create it from birth through grade 5, free, accessible for everyone in the country.
Gotta love that. Jessica, same question.
That's a great answer. Mine are a little bit more, theoretical. I would say if we could make education equitable for all students so they feel valued and they really enjoy their educational experience. And right now, I think for teachers and staff, we've all seen how hard it's been. So I would really say if we could value our teachers, not just with money, but make them superstars in their community, that would be, I think, really help our education system.
Yes, two tremendous answers for the price of one. You can find out more about our guests' work by visiting crescentcityschools.org and striveprep.org. Christopher, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you.
Been great. Thanks for having us.
And thank you all for listening to Charter School Superstars.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.